Let's take you right there. We're expected to hear now from the Interior Minister himself in response to reports of police violence.
Secretary of State, General Secretary of the National Police, Head of the National Gendarmerie, ladies and gentlemen, directors and heads of the supervisory bodies of the Ministry of Interior, ladies and gentlemen, there are texts that change the face of the world, words that echo today. I think the first sentence of the Declaration of Human Rights, which were quoted by Martin Luther King. I'm also thinking of footage that have shocked us at our deepest part of our soul. This footage which really attack our very honor. 8 minutes and 40 seconds. That is how long George Floyd stood pinned to the ground under the knee of a policeman choking his neck. This was agony, shame, and this was the time that was necessary to strangle honor. Since then, the anger against the police have spread around the world. All over the world, there have been massive gatherings of people. Despite the sanitary rules, the health rules, men and women have got together in order to push for change, to fight against racism and against hatred and all forms of discrimination. I hear this cry. I hear it like the voice of many French people. I mean, there's no space, no place for racism in our societies. And yet it's hiding behind 1,000 different faces. It takes 1,000 different shapes. But it is an evil, an abject evil, an impossible evil that divides and opposes us and harms us. In these demonstrations, there was violence due to the actions of a minority, but in these demonstrations in France, as elsewhere in the world, I heard criticism of our law enforcement agencies. I heard accusations, I heard defiance, hostility, and even more sometimes. And I don't want to feed into the vicious circle, which means that each response is slightly less understood. In these moments, let's never forget who we are. The French people, united within our republic, gathered around our common values, liberty, equality, and fraternity. The French people, protected by law enforcement, which maintains its daily security and its serenity. At this time, when it's easy to jump ahead, when many things are misunderstood, I'd like everyone to remind themselves that France is not the United States, that the police and the gendarmes come and help us when we need them, that they're there for us, present to fight against terrorism, to fight against crime, to fight against trafficking, to fight against violence and against racism too. So with Laurent Nunez, we will keep defending the honor of law enforcement. We will defend it against insults and attacks, against the slogans that are spat at them. We will, when you hear commit suicide or everyone hates the police, these are not appeals for calm or to respect. The police and the gendarmerie are the guardians of our republic. They guarantee our security. They guarantee our daily security. There is no racist institution. There is only a Republican police which reflects our society, because our police and our gendarmerie reflect the image of France. In many administrations, you can see people from all different horizons, from different races, from all different faiths. You can also find some of the words that hurt us. There is racism, anti-Semitism, hatred. These words are not an opinion. they are a crime. And this is true for everyone, but because they are the defenders of our republic, I will be especially demanding of our police and our law enforcement agencies. And that's why I firmly say once again that racism has no place within our societies and even less in our Republican police force. It's not enough just to condemn it. We need to fight it. We need to track it. We need to fight it with all our strength. We need to give ourselves the means to fight it. A few months ago, the President of the Republic asked me to review the code of conduct and the duty of responsibility and the behavior within the police force. And all different fields have been examined, and we will take strong decisions in line with what we have set up from the beginning of our mandate. These strong decisions are essential because I will not let the odious behavior of some people to jeopardize an entire institution. To wear a police uniform or a gendarme uniform is an honor, and everyone has to merit it. Recently, too many people have failed in their Republican duty. Racist words were spread, discrimination was revealed, and this is unacceptable. And so we have acted systematically without delay. At Rouen, 6 policemen were making racist comments on one of their colleagues. And as soon as we found out what was happening in January, a disciplinary process was started and a criminal investigation was launched. Things are moving forward, and the guilty parties will be heard in front of a supervisory body. In Saint-Denis, policemen who had also made racist comments were also immediately suspended. And on Friday, there was a group on Facebook that also made racist comments, a Facebook group full of policemen, and I also have acted against this. I will have a zero-tolerance approach towards racism in our republic. I would like everyone to know that when one wears a uniform, the blue uniform of law enforcement, one can never be above the law. One has to be even more exemplary than others when one wears a uniform. So I want zero tolerance for racism in law enforcement. We've acted very much in this direction recently. From the beginning of our mandate, we acted, and we made sure that every gendarme and every policeman would be trained against racism, anti-Semitism, and discrimination. And they undergo this training during their police training. We have reinforced our arsenal to fight against hate, especially against hate speech online. We have reinforced our actions against all anti-Semitic and racist actions. We have set up special networks of investigators and special bodies within each commissariat and in each police unit. We will never stop fighting against hatred. And that's why on Friday, I asked the Director General of the National Police, of the Gendarmerie, the Prefect of Police, I gave them instructions that are completely unambiguous. We will not tolerate anything that jeopardizes our code of conduct. No racist can wear the uniform of our police forces. And so I've asked for a systematic firing of anyone who is suspected of racist proposals. I would like disciplinary procedures to be set up in parallel to criminal investigations. ID checks are often considered, the ID checks that are made by our police are often thought to be targeted against certain people. And I know that that's how it's felt. But these ID checks are important when looking for people who might be suspected of crimes. It is not just something that we do lightheartedly. It's also not a sanction for the way someone looks, and these operations are not carried out because of someone's skin color. And so I have also instructed all the police and gendarmerie services to remind them of how ID checks should be carried out and to make sure that they will never be able to cover up discrimination. Every policeman, every gendarme has to visibly carry their identity, and cameras have to be used when IDs are checked, and body cams. The number of ID checks should not be used as a quota for police, for the police. We have to train our police better. We have to improve our basic training of the police. We work together with the interministerial delegation fighting against racism, discrimination, and anti-Semitism and anti-LGBT. And as well as other bodies. Many things have already been achieved, and many organizations have already working with our police forces. I'm also thinking about this important moment of training at the Memorial Against the Holocaust in Drancy. This moment is very important to remind our agents what hatred is all about. We believe in training our police, and we will work through it. It allows us to remain vigilant throughout the whole career of our policemen, to accompany our new recruits and to help them throughout their career. This helps. Continuous training will help those who have been in our police force for a long time at a time when these behaviors were more tolerated. We will set up new ideas and new ways of working from Thursday. I will work with the president of l'ICRA, and we will study for a framework to set up a renewed cooperation, strengthened cooperation. I would also like us to set up alert signals, warning signals, and I remind every gendarme and every policeman and every hierarchical superior that everyone must speak out about racist behaviors. So the assessment of the training of our police will include raising awareness to discrimination. I don't think we'll be able to build things if we do not do it with the police themselves. So that's why I would like to work with the police themselves, and I will be discussing these points with the partners of the police trade unions and that. We have been working for a long time. I stand by these words. But we need strong actions today. They are necessary because they are the basis of the trust between the police and our people. Trust is essential, and that is what should be the main motto of every policeman and every citizen. That is the only feeling that the uniform should bring up among our population. I know, of course, that many of our citizens depend on the police, and they know that they can depend on them, and they admire their commitment. Recently, the Savoie-Mont-Blanc University researchers asked 140,000 people of all different ages related who had some sort of relationship with the police. And the researchers specifically asked people who lived in Republican Reconquest parts of the time. They represent 10% of those who were investigated. The results are clear. 85% of the people who were asked have a positive view of the police. And 80% believe that the police have a professional conduct during their interventions. I could be proud of these results. The esteem of a great majority could hide the malaise that exists among some other of our citizens, but I am not satisfied. I will only be satisfied when 100% of our citizens will have a positive view of the police. I will only be satisfied when we will be able to stop asking ourselves how we went from "Long live the police," which was heard during the demonstrations after the Charlie Hebdo attacks, to the slogans we've heard these last days. And part of the answer to these questions is in the link that we have to weave between the police and people who live in certain parts of our country. We have to build trust trust that leads to respect and not fear. And that's the mission that the Prime Minister and the President have given me, and that is the goal that we've been following from the beginning of our mandate. That is the meaning of the daily police program that was launched in these last years. It is the goal of the reflection we started last summer on the national program of law enforcement. It is also the goal of the citizens' panels representing French society that I brought together in Beauvau twice in January in order to think about, to reflect on the relationship between the police and the people. This was an unprecedented exercise. And it was very precious because everyone was able to freely share their own story, their own experience with the police. And in the history of this relationship between the police and the people, there are events, there are memories, there are names that are synonyms of doubts, of anger, of solutions. Recently, one of them, Gabrielle, touched the heart of many French people. I, myself, was troubled by what I heard. But we will shed light. And right now, the police view of things is being confronted to medical evaluation. These cases have been brought to justice and the investigations are underway, so I will not voice my opinion on them yet. It is up to the justice to decide who is guilty. And we have to trust in the justice of our laws and our tribunals and not in the justice of Twitter and social media. But this doesn't mean that we have to remain blind to the questions that are brought up by anger. Of course, police and the gendarmes have to use force in some cases. I have to be clear because I don't want things to be mixed up. But we need to put an end to displays of violence and to throwing projectiles against the police. The police, when they have to stop violence, that is not violence. When they have to oppose violent protesters, they are not being violent. It is their mission. And sometimes it has to be done using force. The police cannot just hide behind behind words. So the legitimate use of force is important, but they have to respect clear rules. They have to set an example, and what is needed for that is a clear code of conduct. After the death of Cédric Chauviat, I met his family after his death, and I said that we would launch a new mission by the police and the gendarmerie to review our methods of arrest so that this sort of tragedy does not happen again. The French police is not the American police. But there were legitimate questions that needed to be asked. And after several months of work, we drew certain conclusions, and so I have taken certain actions. The method of restraint by the neck, of strangling, will be abandoned and will no longer be taught in police schools and gendarmerie schools. This is a method that runs many risks. And if a policeman has to keep someone on the ground in a prone restraint, they will not be able to press down on their neck or on their throat. I also asked that the police and the gendarmerie mainstream their methods of teaching. There were still some differences until recently. And finally, I would like a clear effort to be made in training police and gendarmes for work on the ground. Police and gendarmes will have to, from now on, undergo a yearly training program. If they don't, they will not be able to do missions in the public space. These are strong actions that will help reduce risks, and at the same time, they will allow the police and the gendarmerie to carry out their mission. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not forgetting that in order to build this police of trust, we also have to act to combat this feeling of impunity and injustice that many feel. I would like to put an end to certain false ideas. A sort of false idea where people think that the police are never responsible for their actions and the Inspector General of the National Police does not act. This is not true. I have kept repeating to the police and the gendarmes that they have a duty to set an example. And things are clear. Every time someone is suspected, it has to lead to an investigation. And every time someone is found guilty, they have to be condemned. The report of the Inspector General has been published, and it underlines the importance of the training of the inspectorate. It also reminds us of certain figures that put an end to false accusations. There were over 1,600 sanctions against policemen in 2019, over 2,000 sanctions against gendarmes last year. So there is no impunity in France, but that doesn't mean that everything is perfect. I've decided to ask the people responsible for the Code of Conduct at the Ministry of the Interior, to Christian Taubira as well, to preside over a mission on racist acts and words within the police. This will work on the different issues that have been brought up these last few years and on increasing transparency within the police force. These operations will follow every investigation that deals with racism and discrimination, and will be able to propose changes to our methods. This investigation will not be limited to an internal investigation in the Ministry of the Interior. I want it to be open to representatives of civil society. And parallel to that, I have decided to launch reforms when it comes to inspecting the Ministry of the Interior. Today, there are several inspectorates, the most famous one being the Inspector General of the National Police, above which there is the Inspector General of Administration. The reform that we have set out will allow for greater coherence and better interconnection between these inspectorates, and also more independence towards the police. This agency will allow us to pilot the most difficult administrative investigations, the most complex ones, especially the ones aimed at the police and gendarmerie. And I'd like to add that I think that trust is built in both directions. We cannot ignore the insults and the attacks that the police are also victims of. We have to help them. And that's why I asked the Director General of the French police and gendarmerie to meet the trade union representatives of the police in order to hear out proposals for their legal protection whenever necessary. And finally, and this is the last thing I'd like to mention today, in order to build this police of trust, we will need each and every one of our citizens. In a few weeks, I'll be able to, with Laurent Nunez, to present the great changes to come of our security system. The white book and the program we'll publish will be structuring elements of our program for tomorrow. We will not be able to build the police of trust without our citizens. I called a panel of our citizens in January and asked about their personal relationship with the police. And what they said to us, they shared their criticism, their reflections, what their ideas were to improve the relationship between the police and the people. I've decided to go back to them in July to present them with the plan for the reforms of the White Book, but also the White Paper, but also ask them about ideas for changes to come. And that way, the French people will be co-authors of our strategy, and we are building tomorrow with them. Ladies and gentlemen, every day, police and the gendarmes in France are fighting against racism, against anti-Semitism, against homophobia. They are fighting against all the different faces of hatred. Every day, it is them who fight against these evils. They fight against sexist violence, who dismantle trafficking networks. They risk themselves, and they allow our freedom to manifest itself in demonstrations. They're the ones who fight against terrorism and dismantle terrorist networks. Let's not forget this. Let's never forget all that the police do. If I've decided to speak to you today, it's also because I want to talk for the men and women, to the men and women of the police, so that their commitments are not belittled, so they're not forgotten because of the actions of a few bad apples. So we need trust in the police, trust in the gendarmerie, and I'm proud. I'm proud to be at the head of this ministry. I'm proud of these women, proud of these men who keep it alive, and I expect them to do their best. I expect them to be exemplary and ethical, and for them to carry these values and defend them, to defend our institutions, our police and our gendarmerie, and that's why I'm launching these programs to change. That's why I'm asking for the immediate firing of people who are convicted of racist proposals. That's why I'm putting an end to certain dangerous gestures, dangerous techniques, and that's why I'm launching this deep reform. For the last 30 years, I've heard accusations against racism and homophobia, against sexism and discrimination within the police and the gendarmerie. Every ethical failure jeopardizes our law enforcement. Every racist word, every discrimination is an open wound in our Republican contract. And so our fight is not going to be hidden. It's not going to be swept under the carpet. I'm not going to turn a blind eye to these people who have dirtied and sullied the work of an entire institution. I am going to commit myself fully to this fight, because the fight against discrimination is at the heart of my political commitment. I will fight for this because it's not just about setting a good example and transparency, but we also have to be proud. This is what makes the pride of our nation, working citizens and police together. And so I'd like to ask every law enforcement officer, every gendarme, to help me fight racism, homophobia, sexism, to help me and fight hatred, wherever it may be and wherever it may come from. I know I can count on their commitment. I know that they can also count on the support of the French people. Thank you very much.
Okay, we've just been listening there to the French Interior Minister Christophe Castaner speaking at a news conference which sought to address growing concerns about police violence and racism within the ranks of the police. This, of course, comes in the context of a weekend of protests across the globe, including here in France, in response to the police killing of George Floyd in the US city of Minneapolis. Well, this weekend, thousands of people marched through cities across France, calling for an end to racism and police brutality. And speaking there, the French Interior Minister promised there'd be a zero-tolerance approach to racism in the ranks of the French police force. Well, also listening in with me was Erin Oguke from the France 24 news desk. Hi there, Erin. What were your sort of main takeaways from what the Interior Minister said?
I think what's really interesting is that he really tried, I think, to strike a balance between constantly reiterating support for law enforcement and also trying to recognize that people, tens of thousands of people have now taken to the streets at least twice in France, and trying to take that anger into consideration. Now, he started his speech actually with talking about George Floyd in the United States, said that his neck was pressed down for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and that was essentially a disgrace, an aberration. But he did say several times that France is not the United States. Now, towards the end of his speech, he did talk about a few measures that he wants to put in place. He did reiterate several times that he wants forceful measures to continue to be put in place in the future. But at least for now, he said he would ask for the systematic suspension of any officer accused or suspected of racism or using racial language. He said that he wanted to put in place a compulsory annual training session for every officer, and that if they don't follow this on an annual basis, that they will not be able to interact with the public. He also announced a ban on the method of constraint that we saw in the George Floyd video, that consists of pressing your neck down or putting your arms around the neck of a suspect, that was to be banned, and that he also wanted to set up an alert system for people to be able to easily make complaints about racism in the police. I think I'll stop with one last one, which I think is interesting. He did say that he asked Christiane Taubira, who is the former justice minister in France and who is also a black woman, to preside over some type of body that would maybe be a working group or some sort of think tank on racism and discrimination. So I guess perhaps trying to integrate voices of color into these solutions.
Okay, so very keen to come across as having an action plan to really allay a lot of the fears that have been put forward. It's been 2 weeks since George Floyd was killed. There's been protests across the globe, including here in France. And here in France, it really seems to have opened up some old wounds, some of them dating back a number of years, where there have been what some would say comparable cases.
Yes. So there have been several incidents in France, even in the past couple of months. Over the past week, a Facebook video came to light that revealed police officers using racial epithets against Black people, Arab people, Jewish people. There's also, of course, the case of Adama Traoré, who's a young Black man who was asked for his ID papers, and when he was asked for them, ran away from police and died in police custody shortly after. Now, there have been several back and forths about the autopsy, how exactly he died, but one police officer did originally reveal that they essentially had compressed his body on the ground. And so there have been different autopsies that have kind of contradicted one another. Some say that the police were responsible, others say that they weren't. So they're waiting for more clarification on that case.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for that, France 24's Erin Oguke from the news desk. Thank you.